Hi, thank you for joining us on another segment of Eye on You. You are going to love today's show because we have award-winning authors joining us from the Merrimack Valley. Specifically, we have Andre Dubus III, who wrote The Cage Keeper and Other Stories, Bluesman, House of Sand and Fog. And coming up in our later segment, you'll want to stay tuned because we have detective stories and also poetry. Right now, I'd like to take the time to introduce UML student John Ogden. John, I understand that you want to be inspired. You're an author also?
I write. I wouldn't say, I don't know if I'm going to be an author, maybe someday, but more of just writing as a hobby for now.
Okay.
Can I answer for him?
I was just
He's
getting
one of my writing
Andre.
students. I'm Andre. Hi, everybody. He's one of my writing students. He's fantastic.
I know he is.
Got it all. You're going to be an author if you want to be. Period.
We'll see.
Andre, can we start by asking you, how did you get into writing? How old were you?
Well, you know, I'm from a writing family, but that's had nothing to do with it, ironically. My father was the great short story writer Andre Dubus, which is why I have that clunky 3 on my name. There are 2 of us out there. I went to school and got a degree in political science and sociology. I was heading towards graduate school in Marxist social science, a PhD candidate for that. Then I was going to go to law school. Then I was going to be a left-wing liberal politician ridding the world of all injustice. That's really where I was at 20, 21 years of age. And then I fell in love with a girl who was writing fiction. And I began to read her fiction. And she had a crush on a guy named Joe, honestly, Bridget. She had a crush on a guy named Joe in her writing class, and every day she'd come home talking about Joe. And I hated Joe for that reason. And one day, I saw in her bed a story by Joe, and I read the story. And it was 4 pages long, a story called The Diner. And it was lovely little tale about just a kid working in a diner at 3 in the morning in Haverhill when 2 hookers come in and get treated cruelly. And by the time I was done with that story, I was kind of in love with Joe, too. It was sensitive, it was beautiful, and honestly, I've been reading nothing but political science, and I was inspired. I wanted to write a scene. And I started to write. The very next week, I started to write, and it was very sincere. Gustave Flaubert has this terrible line. He said, you know, a bad book comes as sincerely from a man's soul as a good one. So I was very sincere, but it was very bad. But I was hooked, and I'll tell you why. When I finished writing that short story, it took about 3 months. I was 21 or 2 years old, and all I knew was I just felt like me for the first time. Whoever Andre is, I don't know, but I know he's got a right to be. I had the right to be me. And that is the only reason I've continued to write for the last 20-something years, is because I won't be me if I don't.
So you said at 21 you began writing, and it wasn't very good. Mm-hmm. But at 23 you were published with Forky, right? Mm-hmm. What happened in those 2 years? How'd that come about from not so good to... Didn't you win an award for that?
Yeah. I don't know.
What
I don't know. I don't know, John. Good luck, good fortune is what it was, and I love that having happened. But I don't know. That was the Forky is the prison story you're talking about.
Did you have prison experience?
No. Well.
Or did you know somebody? Not you.
See, my kids are at this age where I'm dreading them reading my writing. They're at that point where they're starting to read. I was arrested, actually, for brawling as a kid, but I was never, I was under 18. And never went to prison. No, I worked in a halfway house for convicted adult felons in Colorado. And my job was really just to monitor them and make sure they were taking their meds and not taking drugs or drinking and going to work. And I probably worked at that job for about 7 months, and I wrote about it for about 7 years afterwards. Because these are men and women who'd done terrible things. We had murderers in the house, people who'd raped people. There was one guy who'd killed his girlfriend's 2 sons with a baseball bat. They'd done terrible things, and that first story came from me watching these hardened criminals. If they were behaving, they could go off on a furlough, and me watching them go off on a date for their first time, acting as self-conscious as a 16-year-old. And I wanted to know what's it like to be on a date after being in prison for 7 years, to be on a date with a woman for the first time. And this is what I want to say, and I've said it too much, but I do believe that is the fuel for most writing.
What?
It's certainly the fuel for me. Curiosity. You know, I tend to write best when I know very little about a subject. I mean, really, the less I know, the better. At least about the human dimension. You need to find out the particulars of an experience. But so it was curiosity that fueled that, and that was my first published story, and that was a thrill
Can I
and a
ask?
shock.
Can I ask you about the ugly duckling? That story. I
yeah.
found that disturbing, but
Yeah, well, you're talking about, it's actually Duckling Girl.
okay,
and
Duckling
which is a
Girl.
weird play on
Sorry.
it. That's okay. You got it from that title. All right, so it was at this house. That's another one I wrote about from that job. In real life, this is a young woman who was sexually abused by 3 or 4 uncles, 2 brothers, her father. There was no woman in the family. She was borderline retarded. She had a severe hair lip. But she was also very voluptuous, and when you met her, she just gave off toxically inappropriate sexual vibes. What I found intriguing about her case was she was a complete and utter victim her entire life. I mean, the abuse began when she was a toddler. When I met her, she was just coming off doing a stretch for murder, aggravated murder, and when they arrested her at the scene, she was laughing as the taxi driver she and her buddy stabbed was bleeding to death. And I could not get out of my mind this circle of tragedy. Here you have a complete victim, yet she's now also a victimizer. And I just wanted to paint her story, which is dark. I know it begins in a dumpster after she's been raped. My stuff is dark. That haunts me. That haunts me, Bridget.
John?
Well, you said about curiosity being the main thing that you look for. In something like Duckling Girl, you take this story that you heard, but you make yourself the character.
Yeah.
You know nothing about what actually was going through your head, but you put yourself in that character to understand or help others understand why. And how do you feel that is so important for a writer to be mature enough to realize other people are also thinking, and you have to relate to them, even if you don't relate to them?
No, I think you're nailing it, buddy. I think you're nailing what the job description of the writer is. I mean, I think the job of the writer is to get inside the private skin of other people. And sometimes you're a male writer writing from the point of view of a woman. You might be white writing from the point of view of a black person, Jewish, Gentile. Here's what I believe, and I believe it passionately, and having children helped me believe it even more. I don't think writers are any more imaginative than anybody else. I don't think composers or actors are either. I think everyone gets issued one of these imaginations, and it's a beautiful, mysterious thing. I think what makes someone write books instead of not write books, for example, is you can't turn the thing off. You know, we all get curious about people. You know, you'll hear about a terrible thing or a great thing, and we actually say, wow, can you imagine? She won megabucks, and the next day she died. So then, you know, you can't stop thinking about those 24 hours of $100 million and then the coffin. I mean, you just can't stop thinking about it. And I guess what I'm suggesting, John, and I think what you're hinting at here is that this whole creative writing thing, especially if you're trying to write what I try to write, which is character-driven stories as opposed to real plot machines, it's a sustained act of empathy, where you're simply asking, what's it like to be you? You know, you're asking, what's it like to be someone in this case? And that power we all have. We all have the power of empathy and compassion. And I think that the writer writes books or stories because we just can't shut off that question. Which is why I'm probably an insomniac too, by the way, and most writers I've known can't sleep.
We're going to take a short break right now, and we'll be right back with Andre Dubus, award-winning author of House of Sand and Fog.
Thank you.
Thanks.